Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Craig Zingerline, and I'm going to talk to you about how to build your first cold email campaign. First, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about me. I'm the current CEO and founder of a company called Velocity Growth. You can check us out at velocitygrowth.com. I've had executive roles mostly in product and growth leadership at companies like Sandbox, Upside Travel, Red Tricycle, Votion, and New Signature, among others. And I started this business after interviewing over 300 founders over the past 4 years about their pain points around growth. And along the way, I've had some decent wins and some total and epic failures, which have taught me a ton about how to try to do things the right way. And today, we're going to dive into the deep end with cold email. And I'm going to quantify it a little bit for you. And then we'll get into some of the tactics and strategies that I use every single day for growing Velocity Growth, as well as work that I'm doing with a bunch of other partners and clients on leveraging cold outreach to really grow their pipeline and to drive sales. So first of all, what is cold email? Well, cold email is a very, very direct way to think about and apply customer acquisition. I think of it as a channel. So when I think about the main ways to grow a company, outbound is one of those main, what I call pillars of growth, and cold email and cold outreach is one of the leading channels within that pillar of growth. Think of cold email as a way to supplement your marketing efforts. It's unlikely that you're going to go from zero to scale in cold email overnight. There's a lot of lessons that you're going to learn along the way. But what I love about it is it's a great channel in terms of finding different types of audiences across the board based on whatever type of business you have. It can really work for almost any type of company. I've seen it work even for consumer companies, although I would say the focus for cold outreach is generally in the B2B space or in the marketplace side. So how do you think about if cold email is right for you? I think, again, this is great for B2B companies. Think about this as a fairly cheap way to go about customer acquisition. What I mean by cheap is that you don't have a lot of costs like you would with paid channels to run the channel. However, I consider this to be a very expensive time-based channel, meaning you're going to spend a lot of time in it to understand how to build the process. And then once you get cold email off the ground, I don't want to say it runs itself, but with a lot of tweaks and iterations, you'll get into a cadence that doesn't generally tie up a whole significant amount of your time. So you can actually go focus on other channels as well. So I've put together 5 steps for running a great cold outreach campaign. We're going to talk a little bit about our ideal customer profile. We're going to talk about lists and targeting. We're going to talk about building great email content, tools and systems, and finally, how we think about experimentation with this. So we're going to dive right in. What you're looking at here is a screenshot of weekly campaigns that I had done with cold outreach about 1.5 years ago, right as we were starting this company. And I thought that I knew a lot about cold outreach and I could just scale the channel. I will say that cold email is best when you know your buyer. So what you're seeing here, and if you're not looking at the screen, what I'm showing is massive volume in terms of emails being sent out the door, but literally no deals being created from this effort. It was a total flop and epic failure. But the vanity metrics were there. Sending lots of emails, check. Lots of opens, check. Lots of clicks, check. Even lots of replies, check. And I even got to the point where through this outreach, I was getting a lot of demos booked, but I was A, not finding the right targets, and B, not qualifying well. So don't do this. So what I would suggest is that once you understand who your buyer is, that's when your opportunity for cold outreach really comes into play. And at this point in time, when I was really early in this company, I didn't really understand who the ICP was. And basically spent a lot of time and a bunch of money actually trying to scale it. And it just wasn't successful. Now, how do you know who your ICP is, or what happens if you don't know? So I would recommend that you don't use cold email for that because cold outreach is time sensitive and time intensive. You can find your ICP or your ideal customer profile by doing target tests in other channels. Doing things like paid advertising to hone in on your target and messaging are things that I would probably do first. So if you don't yet know who your buyer is and you don't have any deals yet in your pipeline, or you're not actively closing new business, you may not find that cold outreach is going to speed up that process. So what I would recommend is that you first hone in on that targeting and then put cold outreach to work. And you'll kind of understand why in a little bit as I dive a little bit deeper. If you're looking for resources on paid ads and testing and other things, check out our website. We've got a ton of free content up there. I would urge you not to just go in deep on cold outreach unless you know that buyer. So just start with the buyer and that ICP. We're going to talk about lists. So how do you build a list? How do you find that target once you understand who that buyer is or your ICP is? And where I look is on LinkedIn Sales Navigator. So I've got a paid account on Sales Navigator. I use a product called Apollo and Apollo Search. And there's also other things that you can do to build your list. You can sponsor a conference and get a list that way. There's other ways to build your list. You probably already have a list if you're already in existence with your company. You can also use cold outreach to kind of warm that existing list that you have. But I mostly use Sales Navigator and Apollo. So when I think about the list building activities, what I'm showing on the screen here is targeting using Sales Navigator, the VP of marketing role for US companies that are large. So United States geography, 1,000 to 5,000 company headcount, and the title VP of marketing. So that's one target that I will go after. And I can build that list on Sales Navigator, and then I can pull that into Apollo, which is what I use for email sending. We'll talk about platforms in a minute. And then here's a totally different list. This list is actually pulled from Apollo itself. This is founders, US-based, size 11 to 50 company with a broad set of keywords and industries. So I'm in this scenario, I've got 30,000 potential targets that fit this ICP and this persona that I'm going after. Now, that's all well and good. So you need to have the ICP. You need to figure out how to pull the list. You need to actually go through the motions to pull the list. What I would strongly recommend at this point is that you start to think about email content and messaging. And think about messaging as if you're speaking one-on-one with somebody. So a lot of the problems that I see with direct outreach, either on LinkedIn, other channels, or especially on cold email, is that the people doing it are trying to send these bulk campaigns that really have no personalization. I would actually argue the more personalized you can get, it does mean that you're going to have less bulk and volume, but it's highly going to be targeted to whom you're going after. And so messaging really needs to speak to a single audience. Just like if you're running paid ads on Google, paid search ads on Google, you want single keyword access group. Think of email the same way. You want one message for one target and one set of granularity with an offer that resonates with them. And at this point, I would start to write that content for the persona that you're going after. So I showed you two different personas. I'm going to have totally different content and totally different sequences and campaigns for each of those. I will write 4 or 5 emails in a sequence that I'm going to send out to my prospects, 3 of which at least are going to be what I call value add emails. And I'll show you an example of this in a second. And again, use what you know works for your industry. If you've got other examples that you've responded to from cold email that you received, you can riff on that. Look at what your competitors and peers are doing. Sequencing. So sequencing is the act of putting your cold email messages into an email campaign that follows a sequence, which is a linear-based sequence. Usually you'll set up a campaign with X number of emails over Y number of days. The best practices here keep changing. What I would recommend is usually a 3 to 5 email sequence, and you put that out over a course of 2 to 3 weeks. And again, focus on value added content and only do one bump. So there's been some interesting Twitter threads recently going around that like, if I receive cold email from somebody that does a bump, that's fine. But once it's like, hey, did you see my last message? And you get that a second time, people click the spam button. And I've seen that with some of my own campaigns. So you can do one bump, but this is what I think you need to be thinking about here. So what I'm showing on the screen is founder audience, US-based, 11 to 50 size company, broad targeting. My email sequence is 5 emails over 13 days. So email 1, I ask a rhetorical question. So, hey, Presh, hi, Jackie. As a fellow founder, are you happy with how Launch is growing right now? With the changing market dynamics, it's tough to know, blah, 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 blah. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get some kind of conversation going. And a great way to do that is by asking rhetorical questions about their company, about them, and in my case, about how they're approaching growth. The next email, it's my single one and only bump. So, hi, I'm wondering if you had any thoughts on my last message. Now, that's the only time I will do that bump. And the reason why you do the bump is that a lot of people won't see the first email. They haven't heard of you. They don't know who you are. Maybe you don't have enough brand recognition. And so you do that one bump and you try to get them to take a look. Great. Email 3. I call this the drop knowledge email. So in this one, I kind of nerd out on growth stuff. So I'll say, hey, first name, I don't know what your current revenue is, but let's say it's at 5,000 MRR right now. If you grow at 7% per month, and they'll say, which is not bad, I'll go on and on and on in this email. And I'll basically say, like, if you can get 7% growth up to 20% growth, that's going to have a material impact on your business at the end of the year. Like that increase in growth rate is likely going to double, triple, or quadruple your revenue at the end of the year. So I'm trying to drop some knowledge to position myself as a thought leader in this space, and I'm providing value back to them to get them thinking about how they're growing their startup. 4th email, I talk in this particular campaign about startup failure and the reasons why startups fail. And then more importantly, the things that I'm seeing startups that succeed and do well, the things that they're doing day in and day out. So again, I'm dropping knowledge. And actually at this point, I'm offering 30 minutes of free help to them if they reply and want to book time with me. And that's not really a sales-based call. I'm really trying to add value to that. Now, of course, those lead to the lead nurturing, and oftentimes those conversations do become the active pipeline that we build deals from. But I don't start out with that as the goal, because if you started that with the goal and you're selling, then you're going to be less successful, I think, in terms of building that relationship. And that's what you're trying to do here. The final email is the quote unquote breakup email. And basically what I say here is I'll stop bugging you, but I send them a link to our website and urge them to sign up for our free plan. So this is how I think about email sequencing, and it needs to be good. I'd argue it needs to be great. So take this piece very, very seriously. In my email 3 that I mentioned, talking about MRR and growth rate, you can see that I've got multiple paragraphs here. It's not a super short email, but I am dropping some knowledge and I'm putting that call to action to chat back into the mix here. So my goal is to either get a reply or to get them to book time. So we'll talk about calls to action next. It's unlikely you're going to go from cold to sales without multiple steps. So really what you're trying to do is either get replies or get your target to take some kind of action with you. But don't expect to sell a bunch of stuff from cold email right out of the gates. It just doesn't really work that way. I mean, have you bought something off of a first email, first time ever hearing from somebody? Probably not. Ideally, though, you'll have no more than 2 calls to action. So I love the reply back to me or book time. And I use reply because I use reply, as I mentioned, to add value on a call that helps me warm up that lead, which if it's over email, I'm trying to get them to book time with me. And then that leads to deal flow. And if it's actually direct call to action to book time, then I know that there's quite a bit of intent there. And I can position the way that I handle that call a little bit differently than the lower intent audience. Quickly here, tools and systems. There's a ton of ways to do cold outreach. My current stack, and this has changed a few times, so I generally take a platform agnostic view, but this is what I'm currently using. An email sending domain that is not your current main website. So I use velocity-growth.com to do a lot of the outreach instead of velocitygrowth.com. I would urge you to warm up your inbox, and I would urge you to use a platform like Apollo to actually do the sending. So your email domain, the extra domain, you want to set this up so that you don't impact your primary domain. If you start just blasting people on cold outreach via your main domain, you're probably going to get put on a spam list, and that's going to do a lot of harm to your business. I saw one company have 6 months of pain, literally 6 months of pain from sending out one bad email blast that they just overdid it on. And so you don't want to mess with this. But if you also do this, it's going to allow you to scale up more quickly when you do start to get results. And it also enables you early on to think about delegation. So who else on your team might be sending emails? When you get these extra domains and extra send points out and organized early, you'll actually build in that scale from the start. I've shared a QR code to sign up for Warm Up Inbox. They've got a free trial, and then they've got a really cost-effective basic plan and then a little bit more expensive premium plan. There's also lots of competitors, but we use Warm Up Inbox. I use this to warm up my personal email on my primary domain and the secondary domains. And again, strongly recommended if you do plan to start that outreach. This does take some time to warm up, so you want to start this process early. Kind of looks like this, where they'll give you a sense of how your domain reputation is and what your inbox placement is. This is very, very important because if you just start today and you start blasting cold prospects, you're going to probably see a lot of your stuff go into either categorized inboxes, which means it doesn't hit the inbox, or into spam, and that's not good. The platform that we use right now for some of the list building and for sending is called Apollo. And again, I've got a sign up link here for you. They've actually got a great free plan, so you can check that out. Apollo keeps me highly, highly organized with cold outreach. It enables us to also think about delegation. Again, like who else on your team might be leveraging cold outreach in the future? Apollo is fantastic in terms of list building. And you can see here, I'm using this actually for meetups that I'm hosting. I run this against cold lists. I run this against prospects, keeps it nice and organized, all the lists in the system. You can set up multiple mailboxes. You can set limits on the mailboxes. So, like here, you can see that I won't ever send more than 50 cold emails in a day, just because I'm still kind of in that warm up stage. And I'm not at a point where I'm scaling my cold email again. Like I did that, it didn't work. And now the very highly targeted, highly relevant targeting is working phenomenally well. And so I'm slowly, incrementally increasing that. It gives you the ability to set all these campaigns up in sequences. You get your stats, your reports, your activity log, your contacts. It's really easy to clone campaigns and run experiments. And then I would say that on the note of experimentation, treat cold email as one big experiment, especially early on. So what I don't want you to do is think about this 30,000 person list. It's like, no, break it into chunks of 100. And the smaller the chunk, the better. And again, have one campaign and one set of messaging specific to that small group. Test subject lines, test messaging, test targeting, test your cadence and frequency of send, and then do what I call kill, scale, or hold steady. Really look at the data, and you can parallel track cold email relatively easily. So you can have a list of 100 with one set of messaging and another list of 100 that's the same target with different messaging. And you can really quickly get that sense of what's working and what's not. Double down on the stuff that's working and pull back on the stuff that's not. And then when you feel like the data is telling you and your intuition is telling you that it's time to scale up, that's when it's time. But do this incrementally. What you want to first do is incrementally start sending a higher amount of emails, more velocity to more people. And then you can add more mailboxes. And then you can incrementally scale those mailboxes so you get to a point where you've got a lot more volume going out the door. Maybe that's when you bring on an SDR. My guidance here is this is very, very hard to delegate out of the gates. I would strongly recommend that you as the founder, likely in your company, you're going to need to do this stuff, and just know that you're going to be constantly tweaking and tuning this. And at some point you may saturate the ideal customer profile here, but likely not for a very long time if you start really slowly and incrementally like what I recommend. And just be ready to roll with this. We've got some resources on the website, velocitygrowth.com. What we have is frameworks and strategies for this stuff, hundreds and hundreds of free resources. We run webinars and community events. And if you're looking for help on this, you can always book a consultation with me or just send me an email. I'm happy to answer questions over email. Try cold email out on me, see if I reply to it. And keep your head in the game, though. It takes a little while to figure out, but at scale, this can be a phenomenal channel for you. And it's a significant driver of growth for how we're building Velocity Growth right now. It really is one of our leading channels. Check it out. Thanks, everybody.
Peace, everybody. How's it going? My name is Obi Akpuda. I'm a program manager here at Microsoft for Startups. And also, in addition, I'm a 3-time founder, as well as a cell-site engineer, just among many other things. And so today I want to talk all about building that winning prototype. When we talk about building anything, we talk about any masterpiece, anything that's worthwhile. It starts with a plan. And so I want to dive into this to show some best practices and some things that I've done myself, and I've seen other companies and other products do well in order to not only launch, but scale their products. So hope you guys enjoy everything that you guys learn from here. And as always, happy hacking. When we talk about the startup journey as a whole, it could be really divided into many pieces, but for the sake of argument and the sake of this conversation, we'll break it down in 4 sections. And so we have the idea, MVP, product market fit, and as well as the exit. And between those, we have 3 subsets of 3 different stages, which again is a pre-MVP, which again, startups at this point are usually designing, building, iterating on their product to bring it to market. So bring it to life. That's really the first step for the rest of your life. And so the second one is the pre-product market fit. And so you'll hear the words product market fit a lot. It's a common thing along the series and along my 0 to 1 series that I have that I'll tell you about here in a few. But again, just remember that pre-product market fit, at this point, you've really built your product and maybe you already found your first customer or two. Maybe you found things that you've done well and you're trying to find that a repeatable, scalable solution. And lastly, you've achieved that product market fit, you've understood who your customer is, you've been able to sell pretty well at this point, and you're looking to scale and you're looking to acquire more customers, get to a bigger market, and obviously just take it to the next step from there. Tell you guys a little bit more about what we do. Microsoft for Startups, we're on a mission to help all founders innovate and grow no matter their background, location, or progress. And so Founders Hub is a digital platform that provides all founders at any stage with free resources to build a successful startup. So again, we believe in inclusivity. We believe in access to all. And so this platform is going to provide technology benefits, cloud credits, access to guidance to scaling resources, mentorship, networking, plenty more. And so unlike others in the industry, we at Microsoft for Startups Founders Hub, we don't require any startups to be investor backed or any third party validated to sign up to access these benefits. It's truly plug and play. We want to be able to make this available for everybody. Sign up now for Microsoft Startups at allthingsstartups.microsoft.com. 0 to 1 is the process that I created loosely based off of both the design thinking process as a whole, if you're familiar with it, and as well as the book made famously by Peter Thiel, who's the investor. Go look him up if you haven't. So won't have to give him a plug here. I'm pretty sure you guys know who he is by now. But I thought of the process and, again, my own experiences from being a founder, my own experiences of being an engineer as well, and try to find things that were good and some things that I found that they're repeatable and scalable as well. And so I broke it down into a 6-step process. And so I'll dive into each point, starting with the intro to intro to UX, as well as design thinking. And again, this is all about how a product feels, solving complex problems with an action and solution-oriented approach. And obviously, design thinking, which is a 5-step process that a lot of startups and a lot of product managers and designers live by in terms of, a process and a framework that they use in terms of building a product. And within that, we have the second point, which is the product lifecycle. And again, this is about user-centered design. And I broke it down into 5 points myself, which would be strategy, discovery, analysis, design, and production. And so this is all about the framework of ideation. And again, this is taking you from ideation to prototype to MVP. And the third, we have empathize and define. Again, at this point, we want to get an understanding of who our customers are, understand what the problem is at large as well. And so again, this is where I tell people where the prototyping usually starts. And so getting to know the user at a deeper level, defining the user's needs and the problems. And so from there, you'll be able to form the best solutions. Moving on to step 4, which is the art of ideation. When we talk about ideation, this is all about defining your who, what, and why. If you're talking about who your who, what, and why is, at this point, we want to talk about and really start defining what that unique value proposition statement is. And for that, you'll be able to answer the question of, we do X for Y by doing Z, which is a great framework that I've used and I've seen other companies and other founders use in terms of trying to figure out what they do best and trying to summarize what they do, not only for the sake of understanding the core mission at hand, but also in terms of just trying to maybe acquire users, maybe to get some early buy-in, which we'll talk about some of the pros of, prototyping as a whole. But again, think of the art of ideation as just where, your ideas are going to start forming. And from here, we want to welcome all bad ideas. And so I know in school, they always tell you that there's no such thing as a stupid question. This applies here within the startup realm as well as relates to prototyping. And then step 5, obviously, is the rapid prototyping. Goes without saying, this is where we're going to start getting digital, if you want to call it that. Or, we'll start talking about different ways of prototyping and wireframing, the differences between the two, how it can help you and accelerate your product vision as well as dive into the difference between low fidelity and high fidelity prototypes. Again, getting into the inner workings, the nuts and bolts of, from a design standpoint, what's the difference between the two? They both have similarities, but again, depending on what you're doing, depending on what the scale is, and depending on what your budget and time is, more importantly, is going to usually dictate in terms of what you're trying to put out from there. And so we'll talk about what rapid prototyping is as a whole. And then lastly, which will segue us to the next point, which is from prototype to MVP. So now that you've built it, now we have to build out the information architecture, choosing your stack, and obviously scaling it to a bigger scale and to a bigger level. So now that we've talked about 0 to 1, let's dive into what I talked about before in step 5, which would be the rapid prototyping, and more importantly, the difference between wireframing and prototyping as a whole. Like we talked about before previously, wireframes and prototypes. I can get into the nuts and bolts of it, but the best way I can frame it to you guys is a wireframe is a low fidelity outline sketch of a product screen or page. And so think about it as a blueprint. And if you are a construction worker or if you are an architect, you're not just going to go somewhere and freehand or build something out of memory or build something because you kind of have, a sixth sense. And so that's always great. But again, as you're building anything that's a masterpiece, you want to at least have a rough draft, a sketch. You want to be able to, draw a skeleton and outline that'll help you really just understand the core functionality of what you're trying to do. And again, as it applies to an app or to a product you're building, again, you want to be able to just get the core functionality out of this. We'll talk about later that a lot of people do wrong. And so on the flip side of that, we have prototyping, which is a prototype can be considered a medium to high fidelity simulation of a working model. So again, this is more so of your proof of concept, a little bit more functionality to it, a little more of the bells and whistles as it relates to what the end user will see. And again, we'll talk about some of the best practices, some of the things that you want to look for, and some of the great things that can come out of building a really, really awesome prototype. Like I talked about before, low fidelity versus high fidelity. On the left, we talked about the low fidelity. You're very, very bare bones. We have a basic outline of some of the screens and some of the widgets and some of the assets. But again, there's no color, there's no flair, there's no content. There's really just placeholders, if you will. It kind of looks like a placeholder. It looks like a template that you would get. And so think about a low fidelity as a template that you can start out with. And, the cool thing about some we'll talk about in the future is some of the low code and no code solutions already have pre-built templates. So again, if you're looking to build something, if you're looking to get a good proof of concept and you don't know where to start, if you're not a designer by trade, people have already done the work out there. So there's great ways where you can start. On your right, it looks pretty similar, right? This is going to be your high fidelity prototype in this case. And so we see more of the vibrant colors. We see some of the assets are filled in. We have more so the titles and the names closer to what you're going to see at the end of the process. And so when I say the end of the process, I mean, as the end user, this is what you normally see. Both these are very, very good wireframes to me. The biggest point from here, like I said, is just whether you're doing a low fidelity or high fidelity, is that you just want to make sure that you're getting the core functionality out of it. How prototyping stands out and some of the ways that I've seen prototyping really help people in a positive way as it relates to their product. I won't go into every last one of these, but again, I'll just really touch on some of the really important ones. Like I mentioned before, it allows you to really, give some early good feedback on the product. This goes without saying that if you don't have good feedback, if you're not getting any type of feedback in this phase, that you're still operating off of assumptions. Building that out, you want to be able to get that out there. And so you can get feedback from the users, from the problem itself, if you will. That's one of the biggest things, feedback. And we'll continue to say that in future sessions. And another one is more cost and time saving compared to full stage development. Again, that's a really big one to me, especially when you talk about working as, a solopreneur. Maybe you're working part-time on this, or maybe you're coming out of pocket and you're bootstrapping at this point, which most people are, the prototyping stage. A prototype can really save you a lot of time and money in the end. And it provides the users with better understanding of the product workflow. Again, it's that one old saying that, I could show you better than I could tell you. The biggest thing, like I said, and that goes back to the first point, which is you want to be able to get good feedback. And again, you won't be able to get good feedback without giving them something tangible. When we talk about prototyping and some of the best practices, a question might pop up in your head at this point is, when should we use them? And when would be beneficial to use them at this point? And so these are some of the reasons why you should, and maybe when you should use them at this point. Some of the key points where I just pulled out were, again, the first one is early validation. We mentioned that before in the last slide, which is talking about you want to get that good feedback and as much feedback as possible and early on as possible. Ultimately, you want to make sure that, hey, are we building something that's worthwhile? Is this something that people are going to use? Is this something that people even need at this point? And so second point, brainstorming ideas goes without saying. You want to make sure that you're keeping an open mind as you're building this, but at the same time, it's just a great way to really, I don't want to call it a brain dump, but just a good way to really get creative, especially in the early stage. Everything and anything goes. So as long as it sticks, right? And developer buy-in, if you're handing this off to, working with another team, if you're collaborating with another team, if you're looking to get some buy-in, if you're looking just to, maybe add a CTO, add another founder who's technical, you want to make sure that it's easy and to make sure that they understand it. And so a low fidelity or a high fidelity prototype, either one would really serve you beneficial as it relates to getting that buy-in and understanding that, developers want to have an easier time as they look to build this, especially if you're looking to add to your team. Next is usability testing. That goes into the last couple points, which again, you just want to make sure that it's worthwhile, that, it's not buggy. Obviously it will be buggy at some point, especially in the prototyping phase. You want to make sure that the core functionality and that we can get from point A to point B. And so the companies and the startups that do that well, obviously are the ones that are able to scale and to do awesome things with their product. And so just pay attention to that. And then lastly, like I said before, keeping stakeholders in the loop. When we talk about stakeholders, that can be future customers, that could be investors, that could be people who are just, generally interested in seeing you win. You want to make sure that they understand that, hey, we're working. Yeah, we might be in stealth mode, whether you are building in stealth mode, maybe you are being visible out there, but at the same time, you want to make sure that people see the process, right? So even though, yes, your version 0.1 isn't going to be as great as version, your V12, but at the same time, people are going to be able to see the progress. And so there is a lot of power in being candid in terms of, where you guys are and how you guys have grown and how you've built and how you've gone from point A to point B. So If you found any of that interesting, for more information on 0 to 1, prototyping, and all things Microsoft for startups, check out aka.ms/from 0 to 1. Again, that's aka.ms/from 0 to 1. Learn more all about 0 to 1, about this program, about what I've been doing over the past few months. There you'll find live AMAs. You'll find some blog posts that we've done for a whole series over the past few months and plenty more. So stay tuned and find out more about anything about prototyping needs from there. So look forward to you guys checking that out, and check the link below, and happy hacking.